things like that. So if you could help us out tonight, if you would check into as many of your sessions as you can this evening, that will allow us to figure out our attendance at those sessions, and we can move to bigger rooms if necessary while we still have the opportunity to make those changes. The second thing you should know is if you missed a session today because of a situation like that, we do plan to repeat some of our most well-attended sessions tomorrow. As we enjoy dinner together, we have the privilege of hearing from our keynote speaker, Katie Garner. But first, I would like to recognize some very special dignitaries that we have joining us tonight, including Sarah Hitchcock from the Policy Advisor for the Governor, and her guest, fellow educator, Pam Hitchcock. Dr. Janice Minder, Vice President of Academic Policy and Planning for the Board of Regents. And finally, South Dakota Board of Education Standards members, President Steve Perkins. And we believe we had Phyllis Heineman here earlier today. I don't believe she's here tomorrow, as well as Tanya Warzeka. You may recognize Dr. Warzeka's name. She'll be leaving Dakota Valley and taking over the T School District here coming up in July 1st. Now on to our evening's keynote speaker, Katie Garner. Katie is the founder of Kendor Learning and an internationally recognized speaker, author, and literary consultant. With over 25 years of experience, Katie specializes in connecting brain research with literacy instruction. Her engaging presentation style and practical strategies have helped thousands of educators transform their reading instruction. So now, please join me in welcoming Katie Garner.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. And I have to say, I feel a little like Harry Potter with the walking in and out of the fireplace. This is just absolutely incredible. I hope you had a wonderful dinner. And we are going to jump right into things because there's so much that I want to pack into this evening. So I hope you are well fed and just ready to go. I also have to remember I don't have to stay near this because I can walk wherever I want, and I'm so trained to stay here. So I know this is a really wide room, and I feel like I can't really see everybody as well as I'd like to, so I'm going to try to go back and forth a good bit as I'm starting to share things. I am going to ask for an informal poll on levels. So can you raise your hand if you are at an elementary school or work with elementary students? Okay, wow, that's either the bulk or you guys are hiding all the middle and high schools somewhere in between you. Middle school teachers. Okay, there they are, small but mighty. High school teachers. Okay, I see a lot less of you, but you are in and around there. That is awesome. Actually, that's about the breakdown I was expecting, but the one thing that I think teachers don't always expect, especially across the grade levels, is that we all have a place at this table, even when we're having a conversation about something as granular as this thing called the code, the phonics code. It's really the code of our language. It's the sounds and symbols that make up words across all levels, whether you're 5 or 50. So if you don't have all of the pieces of this puzzle, you're really working at a disadvantage across the course of life, especially if you're a student that's on the kind of unlevel end of the playground, where a lot of things aren't coming on board just by, experience and exposure at home. Support isn't just ongoing or automatic. Or you've got kids who really struggle with certain deficits, whether it's cognitive or, sometimes it's just experience, being in and out of school a lot. So for a lot of reasons, kids get these holes. And whether you work with upper grade students who just have these gaping holes in skill ability that prevent them from fully accessing the code in a way that real readers and writers do with ease and excitement, or if you're at an early grade level where they are just one big gaping hole in skill ability, like they don't know who they are, where they are, or what they're doing. And they just kind of bobble into school, and then the first few days of kindergarten, raise your hand if you're a kindergarten teacher. Any kindergarten? Okay. If you teach kindergarten, you know how much of a void it can appear kids have or are when they walk into that classroom. And yet, what are we doing all day long across any grade level? We're reading and writing across the day, and we're all using the same code to do it. So the reason I'm saying this is every single person in here that works with every single student, you'll always have an opportunity to see where there are these holes that need to be filled. And it doesn't mean that you have to go back and teach years worth of things that aren't part of what you're doing at your level. It means that tonight, we're going to talk about how we can use neuroscience to plug holes fast and kind of right the playing field, regardless of where kids may fall on it or what issues they may be dealing with. So no matter what level you work with, 5-year-olds or 55-year-olds, we are going to kind of join together as we really look at what we can do, how it can work, and how early and easily it can happen. So I'm going to start here by first telling you that there is a group. It's a really good place to kind of continue the conversation after session. There are all level teachers, so all the way up to high school, all the way up to college, and then obviously down as low as pre-K. So it's a really great place to kind of let your questions come out after you've had a chance to really digest everything, and also to look for anything you can't find or that you need after this session or after the sessions tomorrow that I'll be doing. So you can either use that scan QR code or you can use the link that should be in the app. Now, the first thing I want to do is set the stage for what a mess our language can seem, especially if you're coming at it from other language perspectives, but also if you're coming at it from a kid who's just learning how to read or write or who really struggles with reading or writing, or if you're a teacher who struggles with how to make sense of what kids are reading and writing. So let's just take a couple little examples. And this happens to us every day. We tell kids at the earliest grade levels, T says turtle, t, 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 but it actually never does. Almost never. Now, I shouldn't say that. T does say turtle, but every time you see a T, what is it almost always going to be saying that isn't t in words? Now, of course, it's not alone. It's the TH. But 10 to 1, you would lose the bet that when kids see a letter that looks like this, which we call a T, that they should say t and then would be successful in reading the word. Because if they said t every time they saw a word with this letter in it, they would be wrong 90% of the time. Because unless the book is about Tommy and his turtle trotting to Toronto, you're going to see words like this, them, they, there, they, this, those, there, etc. 10 to 1 over words where the letter T actually makes the sound that it should. Now, the reason that's such a problem is the TH consonant digraph phonics rule is not supposed to be taught based on most scopes and sequences until, depending on the program, first grade, sometimes end of kinder, sometimes later in first grade than the beginning, like up to early winter. Now just think for a minute about how impossible it is to make use of the time kids are reading and writing all day long from the beginning of kinder if you have to unreinforce the one sound you're trying to elicit for your assessment, which in kindergarten is, when they see a T, t. So it's one thing to not be able to reinforce what's supposed to happen, but it's a whole other thing to have to constantly unreinforce it all day. And T is just the tip of the iceberg. Calendar time. Now, I know today a lot of teachers don't do calendar anymore at the early grade levels, which I think is unusual because you can knock out so many math skills and reading skills in a quick 5-minute calendar. But if you do use the calendar, you'll notice that almost every single word on it defies another letter in our alphabet, and it's one of the letters that's the most common in so many words. Why? We tell kids Y says yo, yo, y, y, y. But if you look at the calendar, it blows it to heck. Because every single word on that calendar, practically, has a Y in it. And in all of those words, Y is doing everything other than the one sound that we teach kids at the beginning grade levels that it's supposed to make. Like in the word January, July, Sunday, M-A. Look at the words for the weather, sunny, cloudy, rainy. We read big books in the classroom that are by a certain author. There's that Y again, but if we try to show kids how reading works and we sound it out, we get B-Y. But it's not B-Y, it's by, not to be confused with Y saying E in words like January and February, or the Y being in the oi sound, like on the boys' bathroom. To a kid, it looks like Y can do pretty much whatever it wants. It can say E, it can say I, it can say oi, it can say A. You would actually be hard-pressed to find it making the one sound it's supposed to, but the best pattern to assume it will be making is everything other than that. So that's the least likely sound Y actually will make, is the Y sound, which is so confusing. And do you know that phonics skill is typically taught at the end of second grade because it's very complicated as a phonics skill. It's the positional sounds of Y. So not only can Y make all of those sounds, sometimes on its own, sometimes with other letters, but it also is dependent upon the position in a word that it's found. And there are so many moving parts to that phonics skill that of course it's far too complex to be delivered early on to a kid who can't find his own shoe. But is it really? Because we can use neuroscience to carve a straight path and do it literally on the first day of school in kindergarten, before they even know what a letter Y is or what it looks like. This is where we get to really play on both ends of the playground. And this is also where I think there's a gaping hole for teachers when it comes to the science of reading being about so much more than how the brain learns to read. It is equally, if not even more, about how the brain actually learns. Because within how the brain actually learns is how the brain learns to read, but also how the brain learns. And I don't mean a kinder brain or a second grade brain or a special needs high school brain or a non-English speaking brain. I mean the universal systems for learning, our brain development, what areas are wide open and what areas are really tricky to get through. There's some really clear markers for ways we can cheat from a neuroscience perspective and cover so much ground so quickly and with complete ease. And we're really not making use of that. That's our goal tonight, is to just arm you with these tools. I'm not gonna call them tricks, but it is a lot like cheating a chess opponent whose moves you know oh so well. And that's really how I like to use the neuroscience. Yes, to align with it from a strategy perspective, but also to know how to work, and by it I mean the brain. So yes, to align with the brain systems for learning, but also to know how to work around the pitfalls that you know you will face if you've taught long enough, and if you'd work with struggling or early readers long enough. Now there's one more I want to point out here. So whenever someone might say, well, they don't really need code delivery that quickly. I mean, it's fine to just go slow and plod through and do things in a very kind of sequential manner. Now, by the way, you do have to have a sequential scope and sequence for phonics skill introduction because it is so critical that you have grade level accountability and that skills are all covered. It can't be willy-nilly, but that's not. Your scope and sequence isn't handcuffs that shackle you to not making sense of words kids are looking at right now. And one of the words kids are looking at right now, if their name is Howard, is their own name. Kids have to look at their names. They have to not only look at their name, they have to read their name, they have to write their name, they have to find their name. Well, that's gonna be tough for Howard, because if Howard is a straight A kindergarten student, he's gonna think his name is H-A-W-A-R-D. Because it is, based on individual letter sound mastery, which he's a superstar if he has. His name is H-A-W-A-R-D. Now the problem is, how's he supposed to write his name? You know what he's gonna have to do? And I really do believe most Howards are gifted, because what Howard is gonna have to do is rote memorize a random sequence of letters, none of which sounds does he hear, in order to get H-O-W-A-R-D on the page. Because he doesn't hear Howard, he hears H-A-W-A-R-D. So if he wants to say his name's Howard, how is he supposed to account for those letters when he doesn't hear those letters? He has to rote memorize a sequence of letters whose sounds he can't hear. That's gifted. That's much more difficult than the alternative. And I'm going to show you what the alternative is as we move a little further. But this is where I really would take issue with anyone who doesn't think there's a critical need to have more pieces of the puzzle sooner if you're going to have any value in playing with that puzzle. It's so not fun, and it's so not valuable to play with a half-gone puzzle or a half-there puzzle. Because how do you make sense of the pieces coming together when so many pieces that are supposed to be there aren't? How do you put something together that isn't supposed to be together unless you have these pieces as well? It's just not fun. And it really doesn't give much bang for the buck to play with 2 or 3 or 4 pieces of puzzle. The more you have, the more you can do, and the more you actually get out of what you're doing. So this is where we're gonna kind of head. It's right in the middle of this gap between what we know about the brain versus how we teach kids to read. Now, it's definitely gotten better. The gap has closed a lot over the last 5 years, but boy, is it still wide. It's still wide. And luckily, primarily in the area that we're gonna talk about tonight. So we already mentioned this part, that the research on the science of reading and the conversations about the science of reading are so much more than just how the brain learns to read. So much more. It's not just a conversation about terminology and nasalizations and trigraphs and digraphs and diphthongs and triphthongs and scribbles. As a matter of fact, if you look at how the brain actually learns, especially the brains that we're teaching this to, which are either beginning readers and writers who don't know how to find their own foot, or upper grade struggling readers or writers who might have some processing, working memory, auditory, language deficits, or maybe come from a different language background. None of those audiences are the best for the show that is trigraphs, digraphs, diphthongs, triphthongs, scribbles, and nasalizations, and fricatives. The best audience for that are speech pathologists getting their doctorate degree. And we don't need to train a lot of speech pathologists. I mean, it will be nice that in the future we should have many coming up and being ready, because there's so much of this being given to kids, and then we lose our way as to what it's for. Mark Seidenberg, who's a real loud voice in a great way on this conversation about the difference between teaching the code and teaching kids to crack the code. And where is our eye? What ball is it really on? Like, why are we wanting them to know about these phonics terms? What's the goal to the game? That's ultimately where things matter. And I'm not saying terminology isn't helpful. I'm saying the goal of the game is to crack the code. Anything done in the course of that is where we want to head. So phonics doesn't have to be hard at all, but boy, do we make it hard. Boy, oh boy, do we make it hard. It can be so easy if we think like a 5-year-old. Now, I don't want to leave my high school and middle school teachers out, or even 4th and 5th grade, by saying think like a 5-year-old. Thinking like a 5-year-old means just thinking like a human who's walked on the earth at least 5 years. So it's great because it really covers everybody. It's basically just a human framework for experience, behavior, feelings, understanding, things that you would have experienced if you've walked around for about 5 years. And that's a wonderful kind of common denominator for everybody to know, okay, we can at least count on that. So if we think about things a 5-year-old, therefore, AKA almost everyone would know, we know that kids may already have background knowledge that lets them know how to do this, or at least act like this. They probably did it 4 times before they got to school, to their older brother or their little sister. And if they own the feeling or the behavior, the understanding of what that action means, they can actually access a connection to recall the sound of this consonant digraph that we call T and H. Because did you know T and H aren't supposed to sit together ever? Like, they are not allowed. Just like you two boys that I've split up how many times today? 3 already? Well, these 2 letters listen as well as you because they don't pay attention either. They always get together, and every time they do, they stick out their tongues and go, and that's the sound they make, which is why they are not supposed to sit together, but they don't listen. So if you pick up any book, literally any book, turn to any page, close your eyes and do this, you will land on a line that I guarantee you will have those 2 letters in it. And that's just because of how frequent words are with the T and H. And when you do, guess what they'll be saying? So the embedded mnemonic, where we have captured the behavior or the feeling, but we've represented it with the phonics pattern, is now glued. We are now starting to what we call orthographically map, although I much prefer more simple words. I like the word forging, the sound symbol connection in the brain, because that's what we're really going for. We're trying to forge these sound symbol connections, so when you see this pattern, the sound pops out of your mouth. When you hear the sound, you can instantly identify the culprit that makes it, which are those two letters. Now, if kids can think or feel that way, they can access that skill, which means now they have access. When they see words, or when they want to write words, they have access, not ability, access, kind of like on a buffet. They know where the chicken salad is. They see the cake over there. So when they're ready to put it to use, it's not off limits, it's not behind a grade level wall, it's not held behind a structured introduction that you're not allowed to teach until the third quarter of the second semester of second grade. It's there for the taking when they need it. And guess what? They'll need it 1,000 times a day. 1,000 times a day. We can say all day long that we're going to stick a heart around it and just call it a heart word and memorize it, but the bottom line is we're going to get much more bang out of the buck if we actually decode it, actively decode it, not memorize it, because memorizing words is a one-trick pony exercise. You know, all the blood, sweat, and tears kids put in memorizing a word, what they get out of that is one word. But when you own a building block of the code, you get thousands of words, and you can start from the earliest possible grade level. Now, having said that, that embedded mnemonic is critical to do the heavy lifting until such time as kids can keep it in their mental kind of pathways. They have to have an external source to remind them which sound and which patterns go together. What they don't need, though, is you to help them when they see it. That's the beauty of what we're trying to do, is build independent access so that you're not part of the equation. If they want to read or write, let's say they want to write in their journal about the cat, and they look at the alphabet train, and there is no letter that says, so they can look up there, see the letters that are behaving like they are, and then identify which one, which in this case there's only one option, to put down, which is the TH. If they're trying to read a word like the, and they go taha-e, taha-e, instead of you saying, no, 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 Johnny, that word is the, keep on reading, we need to memorize it, put a heart around it, all you have to do is say, really? What? Do you see a phonics secret in that word? And then let them look up wherever you have, if you have little, like whatever your embedded mnemonics might be, in this case it's this one. Let them look up, and they can identify the sound for themselves. So it's really like building a little 7-Eleven one-stop shop for independent reading and writing. It's a sound wall that actually is independent, not with lips and mouths all over it, but actual things kids already know without you getting involved. And spelling and writing and reading then can become something that they can do ongoing through the day. Even just mentally, quietly, while you're doing things at the board, they can keep pace by making sense of what they see that you're doing. Here's another example. Kids are wonderful at roughhousing, especially at recess, and in high school, I guess in the hallways or wherever high schoolers do this. And if they know how to do this and what feelings prompt it, they can access this diphthong. Quite complicated, not supposed to be taught until second grade on most phonics scopes and sequences, because it actually contains two vowel sounds. It moves through two sounds. Ow. Even though it's represented by those two letters, we hear both sounds in one pattern. It makes it very complicated, and there's an alternative sound to it. But it's so easy when you just think about what you say when you get hurt. Ow! So if kids know how to tattle, they can read. If kids know how to say who's not allowed to play outside at recess because they're going to get hurt, then they know which letters aren't allowed to play together because they're going to get hurt. And if you ask them, well, what sound will they make? Ow! And if they can't remember, just pinch them. No, don't really do that. I did not say to actually do that, but you know, it is literally that much of a knee-jerk response. That's how little critical thinking, that's how little cognitive development, that's how little developmental readiness or background experience has to be in place for this to be accessible to everybody. That's the coolest part. Now, by the way, I should tell you something. The reason there's a superhero flying overhead is because superhero O, and you don't know this, but in tomorrow's sessions you'll find out about this, but all the vowels are superheroes because like they have a power that no other letter has. They can say their name name. And of course, Superhero O is their favorite because, and I had a student actually say this, the reason that he thought Superhero O was their favorite is because they look like him, or they look like him, or he looks like them. And they said, you always like the one that looks like you. And I really hadn't thought about that. I used to just say like that was their favorite superhero. But that makes sense. He does look a lot like them. They obviously have a family resemblance. And he's flying overhead because whenever he flies by, OU and OW will stop dead in their tracks, no matter what they're doing, and go, oh, because they love him. So that's the default sound. That's the next most likely thing you would see them do, which is after, ow! Because who wouldn't stop roughhousing if their favorite superhero flew by? And then, of course, you want to call out to him because maybe he'll see you and fly on down and say hello. Oh. So now we can access not just words like how, now, about, or if you're an upper grade, espouse, shrouded, towering. So many words made up of this little building block. They just get bigger and bigger. We can also read words like no slow blow, though, thoroughly, etc. So there's no limit to what we can make available for kids throughout the day if we give them access to the code they need to do it. It's accesses everything, everything. Now this is one I wouldn't recommend showing in your classroom, but I couldn't find a way to show kids with a crush that didn't involve this, so here it is. But if they understand how you could have a little crush on someone, that'll be a good one for high school and middle school too, because they'll get that one right away. If you have a crush on someone and you know that you get so embarrassed when you have to stand like really close to them, especially in a word, that's the sound that comes out. Just like in the words saw, August, because, or dawdle, or hydraulic in science class. I mean, think how many words kids would come to a dead stop on in upper grades. Even kids who are pretty good readers. Gifted kids are a perfect example. A lot of gifted kids are blessed and cursed because they can see words and memorize them and know them really fast. Oftentimes before they have a chance to see how they're actually built, which means if you didn't actually build it, it's harder to know how to take it apart, twist it around, and put other things together with those components. So it's almost a disadvantage if they can learn words so quickly that they don't actually have to go through the rote of building them like a lot of us common people. So what happens is their spelling looks ridiculous in a lot of instances. Words that you would think they would easily be able to spell if they haven't seen them before, it's almost a crapshoot as to what they might put forth as the spelling. So it's really interesting to see the difference with kids who own these building blocks of the code and kids who don't. Where it's the most crucial, of course, are for kids who've made it through the grade levels without it. Because after third grade, the buck stops. I mean, typically, you learn to read in K1, 2, so you can read to learn in 3, 4, 5, and hopefully, of course, they're reading to learn all the way through. But at the end of the day, the introduction of phonics skills typically ends at the end of second grade. That's when it's supposed to be finished. Now, obviously, today, we're going further to make sure everybody has what they need. But you can't get around the fact that by third grade, kids have to read to learn. They're taking tests, they have to draw inferences, make predictions, they have to identify and understand content vocabulary, they have to do complicated math problems. It's almost impossible for a third grader to be stuck on the hump between learning to read and reading to learn. And of course, it only gets worse as they move onward and they get into more complicated territory in upper grades. The sad part is they don't really get any better at reading. They get better at knowing how to work around what they can't read, but they don't get back the code they never got if they miss deliveries across K1, 2. And that's very scary. So, there's a wonderful Harvard neuroscientist. Her name is Mary Helen Immordino-Yang. And one of my favorite quotes, I actually don't think she's at Harvard now. I think she's at Berkeley, I think. But her work is focused on emotional memory and emotion-driven learning. Not the easy pickings that are history and content area that lends itself to storytelling, because any kind of content area where you can get kids to connect and feel and relate is actually kind of easy to generate emotional connections to. Her focus is on algebra, chemistry, because there's not inherent meaning. it's more random and abstract. And so it's even more important to have some sort of feeling-based emotional tie or connection to make the learning easier and faster. I would argue that phonics is the early grade algebra, because it is random symbols and sounds. And I say random, obviously there's an organizational structure to it, but it's all academic. It's not logical. Why does H say, because it does. Just is, just does, just have to remember. Why does TH say, but CH says shh, because it does? Just does, you just have to remember. Like there's not a rationale that lets you go, oh, I get it, which is one of the reasons it's so difficult. So what I like to do is apply her work, her research, which goes directly to the heart of how the brain learns to read. It's right at the crux. But I like to apply it to these early grade obstacles where we're trying to teach the worst show for the worst audience, which unfortunately phonics is when you think about the fact that K1-2, who are the prime target for reading and writing delivery, they are concrete thinkers. They want to touch it, see it, hold it, eat it, feel it. What is phonics? Phonics isn't concrete. Phonics is abstract, symbolic representation of sounds, none of which, or neither of which, do kids even know what they're necessarily doing. Yeah, you have to read and write in order to understand how letters and sounds are actually coming together. Since they can't read or write yet, they're just learning these things all kind of in an isolated vacuum, which makes them even more abstract. And all the while, they're eating their shoe, licking the carpet, and sometimes just, rolling around the floor. That's actually the title of tomorrow's breakouts, by the way. Something about kids who eat their shoes and lick the carpet. I can't remember the first part of it. But that's literally what we're dealing with when we're trying to teach these skills at that level. And it is neurobiologically impossible for kids to think deeply about things they don't care about. And that's an unusual quote for a neuroscientist because they don't ever like to use words like impossible or always. Her basis or her rationale for making that quote is actually looking at a brain scan as you're watching how learners process information and then measuring the areas of engagement as determining caring, meaning the more areas that light up, and this is very simplified, but the more areas that you see lighting up on the scan image are that's that many more connections that are being triggered as that information's being taken in. So when a learner cares about what it is they're thinking about, you get multiple areas of engagement lighting up simultaneously. When they don't, then there's not engagement in those emotional centers to show that level. You might get a little glitch here and there on the radar, but it's not comparable to what you can see when you have the actual engagement. So when she says it's neurobiologically impossible for kids to think deeply about things they don't care about, thinking deeply means showing all of those areas of engagement simultaneously. That's the basis for that. We have to make them care. And do you care about fricatives and nasalizations? Probably not. So take however much you care about that and then cut it by 100, and that's how much your average 5-year-old or non-English speaker or struggling freshman who can't really read is gonna feel. So it's our job to make them care. Now this little girl could probably teach R-controlled vowels, which, by the way, based on a typical scope and sequence is gonna be end of first grade. I've actually seen one where it's in second. She's gonna teach this so well she could take our jobs.
Hi kids, do you wanna know about the secrets about these? So E-R-I-R-U-R. When they get together, they hop in their cars, they drive crazy, and they say, yeah. So, what they do, driving their cars crazy. But when you grow up, you don't do that. Okay?
Did you catch that public service announcement at the end that she threw into that phonics rule? But when you grow up, you don't do that. That's not on page 36 under R-controlled vowels. That's a heartfelt message. She wants you to understand the perils of not taking your driving responsibilities seriously and ending up having the sound come out because you weren't cautious. Now, the reason that this is so well stuck in her craw is because it's not connected to nothing. It's not something that was arbitrarily thrown out in week 5 of lesson 7 in the 3rd quarter of 2nd grade. This is connected to things that she actually has ownership of that clearly must have happened at home. She must have overheard some conversations about responsible driving. Now, I don't know if mom or dad maybe got a ticket, maybe she has an older brother or sister. I don't know. All I know is she's overheard a lot of lectures to someone, can't be her, she's only in kindergarten. Someone's had a lot of lectures about responsible driving and why it's important, because she's associating that with something that actually exists, which means it's anchored deep. It's not going anywhere. And what's fascinating about this is the third day of kindergarten. I don't know if she'd even recognize what an E or an R look like per se, and we're going to talk tomorrow about how simultaneous access really is kind of the key to the kingdom there, because you can have both. You don't have to wait until all the letters are done before you can have these patterns, as long as they're not taught as patterns. Like I would argue that we're not teaching R-controlled vowels. She's not teaching R-controlled vowels. She's telling you about the terrible, awful drivers, the letters that can't drive, and they always go, and those are them. So that can live perfectly alongside her picking up the individual letters, which, by the way, we're also cheating on because we're using muscle memory for that, because that lets us do each thing faster and together. It doesn't really help to just know the sounds letters make individually, because words are made up of letters individually and letters coming together. Most words, almost all words, other than bit, bat, hit, sat, rit, rat, dit, dat, are comprised of letters making the sounds, their individual sounds, and letters making phonic sounds. It takes two to tango. You need both, and not like one after the other, but just as much of both as you can get and as quickly as you can have them. So the reason I'm saying all this is she's a third-day kindergartner. The only way that I received this was because I was doing exactly the same thing I'm doing here at a different state, and her mom happened to be in the group. So other than the fact it wasn't end of school year, it was start, right at the beginning of school. So her mom, when she was talking to her husband, I guess at home, telling him what they did over this 3-day period, she had her kindergarten daughter and a pre-K daughter at the table. So when they were cleaning up after dinner, she wasn't talking to them, she was talking to her husband. But after dinner, she heard all this commotion out in the living room, and she went into the living room and her daughters were playing school. And she filmed this, and then she tweeted it and tagged me in it. So that's how I got to see it. So that's the really, I think, amazing part, is just being in the room where it happened, if you've ever seen Hamilton. Just being in the room where it happened gives kids access to own something they're not supposed to have for 3 more years. What they can do with it is everything. Think how many words you'd have to draw. I mean, and I keep saying draw a heart. Heart words are supposed to be words that you memorize by heart, right? Now, in my day, that meant words like of or to, TWO. Words that were uncrackable, words that were undecodable. Although there is a trick to actually decode words like of and was and come and love. We'll talk about that tomorrow. But I mean real undecodable words. Those are the words you might have to memorize by heart. Not decodable words. Not words like her or how or thee or this or she. Those are easy peasy words if you have access to the code you need to read them. But see, now, because we are going so uber phonics for phonics' sake, we're prioritizing moving slower over actually reading the words that are in front of kids 3,000 times every day. I mean, that's too much to discount. We don't have enough time in the day as it is. How can we devalue every minute of every hour of every day of every week of every month across kindergarten because we're only doing a letter a week? Or maybe a letter a week plus, I don't know, however many heart words we're supposed to memorize. We have so many opportunities to use and play with the code across the day, but only if kids have enough access to start playing. So giving access to something as simple as this, which, by the way, kids start doing when they're 2 and 3 years old. If you drop some cars in front of, especially boys, when they're toddlers, you will hear that sound within about 5 minutes. Just by leaving them alone with those cars. Because the first thing kids tend to think about when they get cars are, so the connection, the sound mapping is already there. What's not there are the phonics patterns. But we can take care of that. That's what embedded mnemonics are. And the research shows, and this is going back now to the science on how the brain learns to read, not how it learns, but how it learns to read, which actually in this case is both. These embedded mnemonics are the easiest, fastest way with the least taxing on working memory to connect the sounds with the symbols. Much more so than, let's say, a picture of a girl with the ER, IRU under it. That's your more typical kind of, phonics poster that you might see. The problem with that is, do you spell the word girl with all 3 patterns? No. And if you speak Spanish, do you call that picture with pigtails girl? No, you call it niño. So how would you know that you're supposed to use the word girl as a measure to then segment the sounds? And what if you can't segment the sounds? G, ol. And if you can segment the sounds, how do you know which sound is the one that these make? Maybe it's the G. Maybe it's the maybe it's the ol, who knows? And all of that depends on actually understanding what this is all about. That these sounds represent, or that these patterns represent sounds, these sounds come together to make words, and we can read and we can write. And the problem is we have to put the cart before the horse, because kids don't know how to read and write, or even what reading and writing is, until they start this process. So they're working towards something that they don't know what it is yet, which is part of why all of this can feel so disconnected, especially for kids, because they don't even know why they're learning what they're learning, because they don't know what all this is going to come together to actually do, until they get enough of the pieces of the puzzle to start to see things coming together. And that's when they get the idea of, oh, I get it. I can put these words together. I can take these words apart. But they can't do that if they only have 4 letters and 6 sight words. You can't do it. You can't do it if you have all 26 letters and no phonics patterns. The more pieces of the puzzle you have, the more you can do with it. So the fact that we can give, not teach, give a skill 3 years before she's supposed to have it means we get 3 years worth of opportunities to play with that until the cows come home, every chance we get. And the words that you're gonna see with those letters in them, they're not complicated, high-level, advanced grade words. They're your part of your 300 sight words that otherwise you would have to memorize. So much fun when the easy thing to teach is actually the easy thing for kids to do. Because usually the harder it is to teach, the more valuable it is for kids. It's almost never the easiest thing to teach is what's the most valuable for kids. Now, the way we're kind of cheating, and we're going to look at this more deeply in a bit after I show you some more things, but we're basically just taking advantage of early brain development. The door is wide open in terms of this, because the brain develops back to front. So when we're looking at these feeling-based affective centers, those are far earlier in development than the higher level executive processing centers, which we have no control over, because a lot of that development, that higher level thinking development, is based on factors that at the early grades we can't control. How much support they have at home, how much interaction they have at home, how much language opportunity they have at home, whether or not there's supportive homework being done, whether or not kids have processing issues that might create blockages for them to even be able to engage in a lot of the things we're doing. There's just so many variables when it comes to higher level critical thinking. And it's not that that's not the goal of the game, it absolutely is. But we want to have the information there ready for the taking so that these higher level processing centers that are still kind of coming on board up into the mid-20s have some food for thought. Like the more easily accessible the information is, the easier it is for kids to think critically about it. So what we want to do is move this information through the back door, which is wide open, because this is that affective domain that Dr. Mary Helena Mordino Yang, such a mouthful, is talking about and writing about. And she's not the only one, but I really love her work. Now this is a quote, so this is not my quote. This is Dr. Seidenberg's quote, and I always worry that it's going to give the wrong impression, because I am not saying that structure is not important. It absolutely is. But you have to be mindful of structure being, here's one piece of the puzzle, go ahead and play with this one. And then you wait a couple days or a week. Here, now you can have 2 pieces of the puzzle. Enjoy those 2 pieces for a bit. I'll be back next week with another one. Like, keep in mind that the code is a puzzle, and that the less pieces you have, the less kids can do anything with it that actually goes toward reading and writing. So the goal is structure the introduction and the skill coverage in your curriculum, but give access and faster delivery to more sooner, earlier in the background. So that whatever words kids are looking at now, they've got access to what they need to crack that sucker, if it's a focus. Now, I'm not saying you want to, give them everything they need to read every word they see in every part of the day. I'm saying pick your battles, pick your poison. TH, super handy. R-controlled vowels, really handy. I can't choose. They're like children. I mean, I can't pick which pieces of the code are the most important. All I know is as you start tossing them out, then you do the next one, then you do the next most helpful one, then you do the next most helpful one, and before you know it, you've given all of them, but they're always through these behaviors and connections. So it's kind of like owning a buffet. You don't have to worry about the fact that it's all there because you're not a waitress forcing it on anybody. You're just giving access to what they might need and will need as they do. And no one is denied that access. The access is accessible to everyone if they understand things that a 5-year-old knows. This, though, is a scope and sequence. It's a common one in a very popular program that personally I actually really like as curriculums go. It's UFLIs, but it takes almost the full year to get past. Now, you do get past this point, obviously. But if you look here, you're on lesson 34 to get the Z for structured focus. Now, what I do like about UFLI is they don't limit the practice, and it's not just UFLI. A lot of the programs are doing a really good job with trying to explain that you're not using the other letters. You're just going to put focus, you're going to spotlight the specific letters over this kind of this trajectory while you're giving access to, through their lessons or through the day, all of these other letter sounds that are coming on board. But that just puts the burden on us to make sure that we are doing that, because it can't all come down to the fact that I delivered an N in this lesson. Like, that N's going to be mixed up with other letters that maybe are in lessons I haven't taught yet, especially if it's a digraph or a diphthong or any phonics pattern, because a lot of those aren't getting taught at all for the first year of school. So if we don't take advantage of what neuroscience lets us do, I just picture this in my head, where you've got this gate, but it's not connected to anything. There's wide open space on both sides, and yet we just cluster together behind that gate. And I say that because in the Facebook group, I actually saw a conversation where I think I had posted something like, I don't know, probably something that's going to come up later in the, I think I even have the slide in here, but it had, like, I don't know if it was the word how or the word thee or something, or maybe it was the word her. And it was just showing something really simple like that video saying, you know, why wait? This doesn't have to be a heart word. Like, you don't have to memorize, but you can read. Teach the reader, not the reading. You know, toss this out and then use it. You'll have so many opportunities just naturally throughout the day. And because I had said it doesn't have to be a heart word, someone jumped in and said, and they clearly didn't know or kind of understand the strategy perspective, because they said we're not memorizing heart words. We're not memorizing heart words. We're just remembering the words until they're formally introduced in the curriculum. But that's not the same as memorizing them. Yes, it is. Yes, learning a word until such time as the skills you need to read it are formally introduced is called memorizing the word. Just like before we taught phonics, when we just memorized all the sight words. Memorizing word is anything other than actively decoding it. Now, I'm not saying that's bad or wrong. I'm just saying if the fruit's so low hanging that you literally just have to go, and then have access to an embedded mnemonic, how can you not? Like, how can you not, like, you know, pinch Johnny just really little and go, ow! And then, or Howard, and help him read his name. Ow! ARD, and then AR is another secret. So when it's so easy, why would we opt to memorize it? But it was so interesting to read the response, because what she was saying is, I'm going to prioritize this order of what I'm allowed to do. I'm not allowed to tell you that, Johnny, yet until it's not on the pacing guide for another year. So Howard, I'll teach you why you're Howard in about 1 year and 2 months, somewhere around February. Like, that's not what any of this is about. Like, that's not the goal. Howard's going to get so many opportunities to read and write his name. Let's get some bang for the buck out of that. Let's let him sound out and use those patterns in his name every single time he sits down to write, ow, ard. And if he can't remember which letters go ow, again, the heavy lifting is the embedded mnemonic. He can look up there to find the letters that are getting hurt, and he can see them, and then he has a choice to make. Do I put the OU or do I put the OW? Now, how's he going to know that? Well, that's going to come through experience as a reader, as a writer, being in a classroom, writing his name, seeing his name. The more he reads, the easier the spelling will be. But spelling can't be fine-tuned by a kid who's not reading. You have to do spelling labor manually if you're working with non-readers. So the easiest way to make spelling really a minimal issue is to get kids reading. Getting kids reading solves almost all of the problems that otherwise we actually create by delaying the access to the code. And that's kind of where I think Dr. Seidenberg keeps heading with a lot of his points he makes in his blogs, are how is, when we overcomplicate and slow things down so much that kids are still memorizing more words than they're reading, how is that better than when phonics wasn't taught and we were memorizing more words than we were reading? Like, at the end of the day, memorizing words is memorizing words, so we want to actively decode. This just reiterates what I already mentioned about a scope, and this is what I wanted to read. I never told you his quote. This was one of his latest blog posts, and it was a really, really strong one. Structured literacy is a plotting approach. The clock is ticking. The goal is to get in, get out, and move on. Now, plotting approach doesn't, again, it's not a negative connotation. You must have structured practice. You have to have a scope and a sequence that targets your work. But you also have another 23 and a half hours of the day to play with the code that you've got, to do the reading and writing that's right in front of you every minute. So there's something called the Matthew effect, and it's a biblical principle: the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And this applies so beautifully to reading achievement. It's actually been used in reading studies to show the benefit of kids who have more sooner and therefore can do more and get more practice with it and become better, stronger readers, and the cyclical effect. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish the rest part of the screen here. But the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and it works in both directions. So for kids, as kids increase the number of phonics skills that they have, or increase the amount of the code that they own, they increase the number of opportunities they have to reinforce them. This is because the more phonics code kids have, the more words they can read. And the more words they can read, the more practice they get. These opportunities lead to even greater ones, and it's an ongoing cycle of reading success. Unfortunately, for kids who have less access to the code, meaning the ones that we hold it back, or we deliver exactly this at exactly this time and expect everybody to get it and acquire those skills at the same rate. What happens if they don't and we move on? They don't and we move on. Then the end of second grade comes, poof, time's up, shipped off to third grade, ready to read to learn. And no opportunity to go back and plug those holes in the learning to read end. So the kids who you would think not to give earlier access to are the very ones who need the early access the most, because they need more time to incubate it, to notice it, to think about it, to care about it, to get excited about it, and then to start independently using it. The kids who you think are actually the higher ones that are ready to hear about the ow or the or the, no, they'd pick it up anyway. They're not the ones most in need. It's the kids who you think can't even find their own, foot. Those are the ones who can stick their tongue out as well as anybody else. And boy, they can scream if you pinch them too, and they probably have a crush on someone that they would get embarrassed if you made them square dance with in the music class. So it's a backward, counterintuitive scenario. The less phonics skills or the less access to the reading code that kids have, the less words they can read. And of course, the less words you can read, the less you're gonna wanna read. Why pick up a book when you can't figure out half the words that are in it? Which means they're gonna get less practice and less opportunities for practice, including across your own instructional day. Because if we don't give them access to the code they need to make sense of the words they're looking at all day long anyway, we're not even getting any value out of all the work we're doing when they're supposed to be reading this word. They're not supposed to be drawing the heart around it, they're supposed to be actively decoding it, because we're teaching these letters and these phonic sounds, but it's all going nowhere if we have to go in two different directions. I'm gonna teach you all these letters and some phonic sounds, and then we're gonna remember all these words with hearts on them. And that's only a problem, granted, early on. But if you don't have kids that are on grade level, meaning they're not making the pacing that they're supposed to, it's a problem for them ongoing. They're always memorizing what they can't read. And that becomes the Band-Aid. And that's the norm for upper grade struggling readers. They know very well how to work around what they can't read. They're very good at it. The bottom falls out from under them and they perform poorly and they don't become lifelong learners, but they know just enough to get by at school to a point. And usually you'll see the bottom fall out from under them around the end of fourth grade. I want to show you this. This is there are two writing activities here, but this on the far right, she's in transitional kindergarten. And I just want you to notice what she built with the blocks that she had in a 10, 15-minute writing activity. My vocation house. Now, she knows about sneaky Y, which is why there's a Y in the word my. He's the Lex Luthor of the alphabet, by the way. The vowels are the superheroes. He's the Lex Luthor. He's very sneaky. We'll talk about him tomorrow. Vocation. If you're wondering why I'm doing this, it's because EY and AY are just too cool. So they always stick up their thumbs like Fonzie, and if you're under 40, you won't know who he is. Ation. Now, she picked AY instead of EY. And then she's got the SH. Great way to build the sh sound. She doesn't have the TION, SION, ATION phonics secret, but that's okay. I could build it with the blocks I do have. And she did. And I would argue that spelling it wrong, and yet oh so right, because her choices were right, it's just the spelling is not correct. But what great reinforcement of these sound symbol connections by doing what she did. Because if you turn that around and apply that skill set as a reader, she can crack those sounds. She can crack those patterns. They don't belong in this word, but she doesn't know that because she doesn't have enough text experience yet because she's only in transitional kindergarten, which is also why she put HOWS instead of HOUS, because to her, ow, it's a crapshoot. She looks up, she sees two choices, she picks one. Now, is that terrible, wrong, and awful? According to one reading coach, it was so sad. A teacher who was in kindergarten had scores that were just far, like up to where the beginning of where second grade was at the kindergarten level. So the district sent in a literacy person to come and figure out what is she doing. One of the things she got to observe was their writing time. One of the things she got to see, and by the way, they fixed this now, so it's not an issue any longer. But the confusion of it was telling, because it kind of falls in line with what we're talking about and making sure we don't fall into. She observed a student doing something exactly like this, using the owl sound to write about flowers or something, I don't know. And she picked the wrong one. She picked OU. And the literacy coach, or she wasn't a literacy coach, she was a literacy assistant director or something. And she said, I just want to let you know, it's great that your kids can read very well, but the problem is I don't think you should be teaching them what you're teaching them, because there are two problems with it. One is she's using the wrong spelling for the word flower, this little girl. And I see other students as well choosing the wrong phonics pattern for certain words. And when I asked, like this little girl, what is that called? She couldn't tell me that it was a diphthong. So this is the reason it's not to be taught until second grade. Now that is not a reason to not teach the owl sound until second grade. That is serving the code over serving cracking the code. The fact that it's a diphthong is nowhere in the equation as a kid goes to write a word like power, or house, or flower, or cow, or goes to attack and figure out a word like coward, or any other word they might look at, or Howard. Reading and writing is about sound to symbol, symbol to sound, as quickly as you can go, and not taxing working memory or relying on things that are not in place. Language background, again, auditory processing, working memory, things we can't control. Dyslexic markers. If we can work around those typical weaknesses for early learners or struggling upper grade learners and give access to these sound symbol connections quickly, then we can move through reading to the purpose it's existing, and writing, which is to communicate ideas and learn. You know, the goal of the game shouldn't be about the code, but the code is the pathway to getting to the goal of the game. And it's certainly nowhere on that pathway is identifying something as a diphthong a requirement to using it, nor is having the spelling fine-tuned. When in truth, not having said that, if this were a kid using the wrong pattern over and over, that's a different story. But this is a kid experimenting, and it is not invented spelling. Invented spelling is where you just, you could put a W and you could spell a word like WKR and say, this says the aliens invaded Earth. Like, it's just more of a whatever you put. And I'm not saying invented spelling is problematic. Kids have to invent what they don't own a code to write. But this is the code. When she puts OU or OW for the owl sound in a word, that means she owns that part of the code. And it also means if she were reading, she could read the words with that pattern in it. What it also means is she hasn't had enough opportunity yet, having only been alive for 5 years, to know which spelling is correct for that particular word. How will she? By reading those words. How do we know she can? Because she already showed us. by virtue of the fact of what she put down on that paper. There's no other logical explanation for how she could spell it wrong and yet oh so right, except that she owned that connection. So this is exactly where we want to be. And to think that we would deny 2 to 3 years of actual use so that we could prioritize a term, it doesn't even make any sense. What it shows me is lack of understanding about what it's all about. And it's hard as a teacher if you get stuck, because we want to serve our curriculum properly. Tim Shanahan had a wonderful blog post, and it was about not serving your curriculum, but what is it called when you're being faithful to your curriculum? Fidelity, thank you. I was thinking faithful to your spouse, fidelity. How to teach the curriculum with fidelity. And he was saying, you are not being unfaithful to your curriculum by doing your job as a teacher, which is to connect what that curriculum is trying to teach the kids and fill in the gap. Meaning, whatever the curriculum has as the goal of the game, the purpose for this. Like right now, she's doing writing and reading. They're doing a writing activity, right? That's what that little girl was doing. And she wanted to write about her house or her flower. So the goal of the game in the curriculum that said it's time for kids to write wanted her to put sounds together to make the words that she wanted to write during that writing time. So the teacher's doing her job by picking up where the curriculum leaves off and giving access to make the curriculum focus make sense. So his point was, whatever a teacher does is where the curriculum leaves off, they pick up and they deliver to the kid how they need to get there, like what they need to get there. So it was a really interesting take because it gives teachers a way to justify why they're doing what they're doing where the curriculum stops and they have to pick up the ball to get it to the kids. That's what a curriculum can't do. It doesn't know what our kids know. It doesn't know that our kids are trying to write a word like house or flower. We do, and then we have to do our best to get them there because the curriculum is saying it's time for them to write in their journals. So we're doing our job when we're giving them access to what they need to do what the curriculum says they should be doing. Now, if our absolute best is to put a heart around something and memorize it, that's our best. But when you know better, you have to do better. So when you know there's a way to actually decode those words, you can't memorize it anymore. Oh, I forgot to show you this. This is kindergarten. And what I loved about this was a kid who actually did not have much support at home at all, as you can tell, because he's building things from whole cloth, and it's interesting to watch his choices. But what I love is he can build anything he darn well likes, and everything he builds shows you like an x-ray his skill set as a reader. He just doesn't have a lot of fine-tuning because he doesn't have support at home. He was actually a little foster guy. But look what he wrote here. This is about fairy tales. And he wrote on the 4th line up, the ghost almost kissed her, but the dad said, and he used quotes, "Get your hands off of my wife!" Exclamation point, end quote. The ghost flew away and they lived happily ever after. Now, who'd have thunk he'd want to take his story there? Like, who would put that on their word wall? You're not going to have "get your hands off my wife" on your word wall for kids to copy, because never would you ever think kids would take their story for a turn in that direction. And yet what I thought was amazing is not only could he build from whole cloth whatever he wanted to say, but he used so little working memory that he had enough thinking left over to add those grown-up things called quotes and put an exclamation point so that you said it the way he, as the author, wanted it said. "Get your hands off of my wife." He wanted it said like that. And he knew by putting an exclamation point, that would be how it would come out. The amount of thinking about all of that while he's putting these sound symbol connections together to make the words, that's incredible, especially when you look at kind of what a mess his fine-tuning is at this point. Like normally a kid who could write that much in kindergarten is reading and writing a lot at home because kindergartners don't have any phonics skills, so they're not building from phonics patterns. They're just writing words they've seen before in books, that they've read before, that they've had support at home to encounter. He's actually building it all from whole cloth. These are not words that he's seen and that he's copying here on his story. If they were, he'd spell them better. Like, look at the word they. Remember how I said EY and AY are like Fonzie and they're just too cool and they go, A. Well, he couldn't decide which one to use, so he wanted to play it safe, put the extra work into it, and he used both. And he did it almost every single line. The top line, the second line, the word they is literally on almost every line. So that's certainly something you would want to fine tune. If you walk across and see this, you might be like, hey buddy, first of all, I love that you know the grown-up sound for A, and you know both ways to get it. So I'm just going to tell you the one the grown-ups use, it's this one. Like, I definitely would fine tune that. But the neat part is I didn't have to, because look at the last line. It's the only line he spelled it correctly, and he didn't even erase. So what I think, and if you've taught kinder before, you know this, when you come to the end of the page, your story must end. There's no such thing as getting another piece of paper typically until they learn they can. So no matter where they are in their story, it will end at the end of the page. So I think what he did was he read what he had already, trying to figure out how he could bring this to a close, and he saw that word and it looked weird. On every line, it looked weird, and then it looked weird, and then finally, by the end, he thought, you know what, I'm pretty sure it's this, and he spelled it the right way. Now, he didn't go back and change all the EAYs, but that's the only thing I can figure as to how he came to the conclusion to use THEY on the very last line. If it had been on any other line, I'd say it was random, but the fact that it's on the last line, and there's no eraser, so what that tells me is he made a conscious choice based on what? I would venture text experience. His own text experience from having written it on every single line in his own story. And that's, again, how cool is that? That's where the higher level processing's kicking in. So we're not avoiding higher level critical thinking. We're feeding things through the back door so that we have something to think about at a higher level without overwhelming working memory, processing, language issues, all the things that struggling kids struggle with. And that early learners struggle with, because those are also signs of developmental readiness that many kids don't have. So this goes back to the Matthew effect in terms of how we start to diverge with good readers reading better, poor readers reading worse. The more the code you have, the more phonics practice you get by default all day long. Not your 30-minute phonics block, the other 23 and a half hours of the day where kids see words that are everywhere. And the kids who don't have access to the code, as I would argue in current day classrooms, they don't. Because they're getting it delivered so slowly, they get very little phonics practice. And you actually hear teachers say, well, the phonics rules are being introduced so quickly, and my kids, it's hard for me to find a way to give them enough practice on each skill we're introducing. It is. It's hard to play with just this puzzle piece when you don't have the other puzzle pieces that are going to be around it in any given context. That's absolutely true. But that's why lateral access instead of linear access just changes everything. And you're not negating the linear access, you're just adding the lateral access. Again, it's much like a buffet. No one's forcing you to devour every one of the 200 dishes that are laid out. But it's all there for the taking the minute you want it. And that's what really matters. So this just goes into, again, how we have the power to enrich. When we do that, this is where end of kinder. Now you can see every single writing sample across 27 kids in 2 different states, starting on the first day of kinder all the way to the end of first grade, just for your own kind of interest of good, bad, ugly, everything in between. But I just pulled some just to show you the compounded interest of more, sooner, earlier, faster. If there were any gifted samples, they were pulled. So so none of these kids could qualify as gifted, or their sample was pulled. And actually this far one this one on the far left, I think, he was actually identified for potentially, at least in kinder, for at the beginning of the year as one to have struggles that maybe needed to be identified for repeat, but this was before kinder, like this was at the pre-kindergarten testing based on how he was coming in and where he was. That obstacle disappears when you're not taking them through the landmines of this front door and we're going through the back door. And I'm not saying those obstacles won't reappear in other ways as kids try to process higher level text and draw inferences and do all the things with advanced reading, but they won't have the added hurdle of trying to figure out the words. But I just love to see the progression, how the trajectory, it's like a bank account. It doesn't stagnate, it just keeps growing and it keeps building. And if you think you don't have opportunities, we're like that literacy director who initially, now she doesn't feel this way now, but at the beginning felt like, well, why would they need to know this anyway? They don't need to know about that diphthong until 2nd grade when it's supposed to be introduced. Well, just look around the course of a day.
Look around, what do you see? Books, books. Are you ready to read? Gather round, what do you hear? Books, books. Open up your ears. I'll read to you, you sing to me. Books, books. Everybody find a seat.
And that's just a free time play in kindergarten. That's not a phonics lesson. Too many things going on to be a phonics lesson. That's just, what do you spot? How many phonics secrets can you find? You'll have a hard time getting through your math lessons because there's so many secrets in them. And if you don't know them, how are you going to read the words? And then the upper grade, the older teachers get upset because they're like, they never read the math directions. You know why that is? Because they can't read the math directions at the early grade levels, so they get in the habit of not reading the math directions, and then when they get to the upper grades, they're so used to not being able to read the math directions, they forget they're supposed to read the math directions. See, I figured that all out just at the early grades, because we just don't think about how phonics, the code, is in every breath of our day, and none of this mileage do we get out. You know what we get out of this math lesson? A math lesson. You know what we could get out of this math lesson? Everything. Like everything. So it's so funny to read, I forgot to point to it here, but where this teacher said, our phonics curriculum moves too fast without enough repetition. And they have a great phonics curriculum, by the way. They have a really good one. Our phonics curriculum moves too fast without enough repetition. I would like more time built in for practice and review. Students need more time to learn the patterns, as 1 or 2 days is not sufficient. I agree with her, but it shouldn't be contained or confined to a 30-minute block. It should breathe across the entire day because words are everywhere. And what are we doing all day long? Reading and writing, making sense of those words. Even at grade levels where we're not supposed to be able to read and write yet, we're still looking at words all day. So as teachers, we have a choice. We can either just look at words or we can actually do something with them. We can actually try to figure them out, use them as food for thought, use them as catalysts for fun conversations and play-based connections, and really make sense of the code kids are looking at now. Because the skill might be slated for 2 years from now, but the word is in front of them right now. So if it's not going to be addressed, like, what's the point? Why are we looking at words if we have no interest in reading them? Upper grade teachers, I'm coming for you in just a minute because you're going to see some words that I would venture to say a lot of high school kids might have trouble figuring out. I'm going to jump past this. This is a 4th grade teacher. I'm just going to let him talk for a minute. His name's Fletcher Nelson.
How would you help a student sound out the word numerous? I wouldn't have known what to say. I would have probably just told him what the word was. We came across this word when we were reading about Bessie Coleman this week, and I was able to simply ask my students when they didn't, the student I was reading with, they didn't know what the word was. They said, do you see any stories in this word? Two that they saw right away was ER and OUS. So that's a good portion of this word. The last thing I asked is that U going to be long or short? They said we have a mommy E right there telling it to say its name, so then we sounded it out. Us. Numerous. It's that simple. For example, this was the word study lesson in our curriculum today. We were looking at vowel combinations that make different sounds. So the double O's for like loose, and for hook, how it's oo or and then the IE, how it can be the long E or the long I, and then for EA, so how it can be a long E or a long A. So we did this lesson, and it was fine. They did a good job on it, but we had already been exposed to these, and they had a reason why behind these sounds because we had this story already. They had this story already, and they had this story already. So even though they've been introduced to those, that gave them the reason why the letters are making those sounds, and they still got to practice it in our curriculum when it came up, even though we had been exposed to those stories months ago. We just got some time to explicitly practice sorting words based off of those 3 stories.
You know, that TH that's in the word the, it's also in medical textbooks that young doctors have to read, like words like thrombosis. Like that's the really neat part of these building blocks is you can use them to build little baby 3-block houses or skyscrapers, but you have to own all of them to do either. This was just something, and I'm gonna kind of wrap up, but this was something that I just liked that someone sent. They said our principal decided to highlight different phonics skills every week in the lunchroom on the whiteboard and let students from all the grade levels add words they knew that had the pattern. It warmed my heart to see how excited the 4th and 5th graders were to show off the big words they knew and to see the little ones beam with pride as they wrote the words that they knew alongside them. What I thought was interesting is we have words, and this is a simple phonics pattern, but I see the word thermosphere, flamethrower, thoroughbred, Catholic, pithy. I mean, the coolest words right alongside words like this, they, that, them. fathom. I mean, just seeing how we are all interconnected by this thing called the code, and it crosses all grades, it crosses all levels. To me, that was eye-opening if I were teaching in an upper grade, thinking, you know, I've got on-grade level stuff I've got to do. I don't have time to disrupt the momentum of my on-grade level of instruction to go back and teach skills he should have had 3 years ago. But you do have 2 seconds to draw a quick connection, show them where it lives, and move. Because now it's off of you, and it's like a one-stop 7-Eleven. They can help themselves when they need to. All you do is redirect the traffic so they know where to go. That's doable. And if you have the power to give them back everything they never got when they were supposed to, you can change their whole life. You can change their life because they'll never get past that 3rd grade level as an actual reader, lifelong learner, if they don't have all of the code to work with. And I'm not talking about all the kids. Some kids will have support at home and tutoring. I'm talking about just the kids who are really reliant on us for what they need. Now, I'm going to just skip through this part. I am going to cover some of this tomorrow, but what I really wanted to just show you is when we're looking at this backdoor of the brain, these social, emotional, feeling-based connections, this is really where things live, and this is how we're bypassing the issues that normally cause blocks for reading. All of these markers that are actually dyslexic markers are also just common ground for early learners. Early learners don't have good developmental readiness because they're beginning grade learners. Working memory, that's why 3-step directions are so difficult at the beginning grade levels. Cognitive processing, you can't process and think critically about information you haven't gotten yet. Auditory processing, how things sound and articulation capability to put it back out. Little grade learners, early grade learners have struggled tremendously with that, and that's normal. But kids who continue to struggle with that have real challenges when it comes to reading and writing. And again, speech and articulation. Most of the kids who are in special reading programs have speech and language support and needs and have had it for a long time. So trying to teach them through the front door, you're walking them straight through the landmine. But the landmines aren't at the back door. It's wide open, and there's nothing for them to just blow up with. So this feeling embarrassed and attending to social feedback, those are the feelings we're triggering when we wrap up an otherwise random phonics skill with a social emotional disguise. And we trick the brain into letting it stay there for a while until such time as it's ready to actually be stored in the proper place for use. Until then, when they see the AU or AW pattern, they'll go, not because they're thinking about lip shape or tongue position, but because they're thinking about how if you have a crush on someone and you have to stand like right together with them in a word, you get really embarrassed and go, like in the word August, which was the word you saw here. And that is something that everybody sees no matter what grade you're in. Or the word automaticity, or caustic, or dawdle. So there's so many words, so little time, and so much fun. Now I'm going to end here. This is a superintendent. I just want to show how every moment of the day are opportunities to use what we can give and years before the use should even begin. So by the time they're supposed to be introduced to it, it's so deep in the gut they could wield it with their eyes closed. This is a superintendent, and he's announcing a snow day, and he's enlisted a couple kindergarten boys to help him.
Hey, I don't know how to spell snow day. Can you guys help me? You can? Okay, well, can you spell snow? Oh wow, that's good. Well, are there some rules about that?
These say
The OWs say ow ow ow.
but they love the superhero.
They love the superhero. Oh, and then what noise do they make then? Oh. Okay, that's very good. What?
I'm not finished because then wait.
Oh, you're not spaced. Okay. All right. That's really good. Is there any other rules I need to know? No? So how do you say that then? What do we say that? Oh, very good. Okay, so that's snow. What about day? Wow. Well, how do you say that?
A-Y.
A-Y. What sound does that make?
A.
Well, what's the cool way to do that? Hey. That's pretty good. All right, you want to look this way and say, snow day.
Snow day.
Now, Now, how do they know it was AY? Because they've seen the word day 3,001 times all over the place. So that's just a perfect example of how you don't have to do that work manually. You don't have to practice and memorize it. It's going to be part of the woodwork for an avid reader. So the trick is getting them reading earlier, sooner, faster, but in a way that's utterly accessible for especially the struggling learners, not your high ones. Your ones who really need the time and the space to incubate and percolate and notice the connections. That's where everything can change. And so don't hold back the code. Like, that's a better way than saying give more faster, because that sounds like overwhelming for us right now. Just don't hold it back. If you need it, take it. Use it. You're going to have a download that's going to let you download almost all of what you're going to need to start playing around with this in your classroom. So access it, use it, play with it. I wish I could say tomorrow, but I don't think you guys are going back to school tomorrow, so it's going to be a little bit of a wait before you get to. But don't hold back the code, because Howard does need the owl, and he needs it now, and so does everybody else. So if you're in high school and you've got some kids who can't figure out a word like hydraulic, ask them if they know about the letters that are in love. Ask them if they know about sneaky Y and a word like symphonic or cacophony. There's so many secrets everywhere. And as the words get bigger, the fun gets better. So I'm going to stop right there. I hope to see you in the group. I'm sorry it's so late, but I will be having a Cosmo in the hotel bar at Sheridan, so if you have any questions, you're welcome to catch me over there. Hopefully I'm okay to say that. Anyway, thank you so much, and I hope to see you guys in tomorrow's breakout, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Katie, for that informative and entertaining presentation on reading and learning science. The practical approaches you've shared will serve as excellent resources for classroom implementation. For those interested, Katie will be conducting additional breakout sessions tomorrow. We'll conclude tonight's proceedings and reconvene tomorrow morning. Breakfast will be served at 7 a.m. with our fireside discussion beginning at 8 a.m. I'll be having a conversation with South Dakota's Teacher of the Year, Amy Verhelst, about her journey implementing the science of reading in her classroom. Enjoy your evening, and I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.
My dear.